What is the most damning evidence against Joseph Smith? Well, fortunately, we have an apologist present today to tell us. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second, isn't an apologist the guy who's supposed to defend the church against criticisms, not the one to criticize the church himself? Well, normally you'd be correct, but this apologist is Jacob Hansen. And with Jacob Hansen, anything goes. He is going to tell us today what is the most damning evidence against Joseph Smith. Please join me here today at Radio Free Mormon as I'm joined by my good friend and co-counsel, Kolby Reddish. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. This is Radio Free Mormon on the air, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Tonight's episode, the most damning evidence against Joseph Smith. Radio Free Mormon, episode 387. Today's date is March 1st, 2025. As I said, I am joined in the studio by Kolby Reddish. And by in the studio, I mean not really in the studio. We're actually, hundreds of miles apart. But what?
That's right. We're together in spirit. Nice to see you this morning, RFM.
Thank you. I'm so excited about this episode because Jacob Hansen has told us what he considers to be the most damning, well, at least very damning evidence against Joseph Smith. And then he took it down. But fortunately, before he took it down, it was captured for posterity, and we're going to preserve it in this episode. Now, you are the guy who's in the middle of this whole story. Can you tell us how this started?
Yeah, so a few weeks ago, or maybe actually just a few days ago, I think it was last week sometime, Jacob Hansen, who runs a pro-Mormon YouTube channel called Thoughtful Faith, he's a frequent contributor to Word Radio, will appear with them a lot too. So he's kind of in this online apologetic space. He created a video responding to a Catholic apologist known as Cameron Bartuzzi, and I think his channel name is Capturing Christianity, if I remember correctly. And Cameron made a video talking about issues with the Book of Abraham and the other Kirtland Egyptian documents, so the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language, basically pointing out how problematic those documents are for Joseph Smith's claims to have been a prophet. Jacob did a response video, and it was in that response video that there was a rather hilarious and really pretty egregious error that actually it was Dan Vogel who caught him in first. Dan and I were chatting in one of the Mormonism After Dark live chats, and he pointed out Jacob's error in the comments of Jacob's video, as well as in Mormonism After Dark. And so I looked into it and saw how crazy the error was. Sorry, go ahead.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, and I think I am because I know the story, but I'm just clarifying this for me and for the audience. Maybe it's because it's early on a Saturday. But here's my understanding is that this guy, Cameron Swayze or whatever his name is, he does this, okay, sorry, Cameron. He does this episode criticizing the Book of Abraham. So he's an anti-Mormon. And now here he comes to save the day as Jacob Hansen on his Thoughtful Taint channel, right? And so he does an episode responding to Cameron and Cameron's criticism of the Book of Abraham. And we have the clip here. We have the clip. By the way, this is no longer available. At least not at Jacob Hansen's website, but that'll be part of the story as we go along. But we have it saved, and this is going to be the individual with the very, very nicely coiffed hair is going to be Cameron, I believe. Let me see here. That's Cameron, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, and I see he's got lavender lights in the background, kind of like Jacob Hansen.
Yeah, true.
I've always considered lavender lights in the background of a podcast a cry for help. But nothing personal, Cameron. So Cameron's going to give his criticism of this. And do we also have Jacob after this criticism?
And then we'll have Jacob
playing this on his show to respond to it. Okay, here we go. Let's play this and see how it goes.
But here's the catch. Joseph Smith's own notebooks, sometimes called the Egyptian alphabet and grammar, include images of the exact Egyptian characters that correspond directly to the published verses of the Book of Abraham.
Uh-oh.
We can literally see the hieroglyphs on one side and the Egyptian translation on the other, detailing Abraham's story.
Not gonna lie, this seems pretty damning, until you realize the document on the screen is not in Joseph Smith's handwriting and literally is not the text from the Book of Abraham. Look closely.
Look closely.
Oh,
Well, that was the end of it.
that was the end of it. That was the end of the clip.
We're going to play this again in a second, but we have to highlight some things. Okay, not going to lie.
Pretty damning.
As the apologist, this looks pretty damning.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
Yeah. But and his reason for saying that it's not pretty damning, he gave two reasons. If people saw that, he gave that it's not in Joseph Smith's handwriting, which we'll talk about in just a second. Mm-hmm. And the second is that this doesn't come from the Book of Abraham. Like that the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language doesn't directly come from the Book of Abraham. Now, I'll say that part he's right about. The relationship between the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language and the Book of Abraham is much more complicated than one-to-one translation. We do have Book of Abraham manuscripts that look very similar to this, that basically would blow a hole in what he's trying to say. Ultimately, what Jacob is trying to say is because the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language is so damning for Joseph Smith's prophetic capabilities, apologists for a long time have been trying to separate Joseph from the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language. So Jacob's overall argument basically is one that's been borrowed, I think, from Hugh Nibley, and other apologists have made it for a long time, which is that paradoxically, it's an argument that makes Joseph Smith an assistant to W.W. Phelps in some type of reverse translation project from the Book of Abraham. The thing that Dan Vogel's book on the Book of Abraham points out is that really, aside from being patently ridiculous to having a prophet play second fiddle to W.W. Phelps, I think the other obvious problem with that theory is that the timeline simply doesn't work unless you accept the translation timeline offered by like a Guy and Mielstein. So really,
can I break this down for the audience? Because
Please.
I think we're about ready to geek out and lose everybody, because it's a very complicated subject. I'm going to try and make it as simple as I can. We all know about the Book of Abraham, okay? That's in the Pearl of Great Price, and that Joseph Smith translated from documents that fell into his possession from the tombs of Egypt, or the catacombs of Egypt, right? From these Egyptian papyri that came into town in 1835, along with some mummies. So what we know is that there's the Book of Abraham. What most people don't know, and they did know for a long time, because unless I'm very much mistaken, it was residing in the church safe, and it was hidden away for a long time, is that Joseph Smith was engaged in another project at the same time, which was related to the scrolls and not necessarily related to the Book of Abraham, okay? But it's still Egyptian, and it's still translation from Egyptian into English. Now, that's called the Egyptian alphabet and grammar, all right? Or the Kirtland Egyptian Abraham documents, whatever it is they're calling them now. Basically, what it is a dictionary, all right? Alphabet and grammar. That's such old school language. It's a dictionary. And what he did was he took all these different Egyptian hieroglyphs that were on the papyrus. That's where he found them. And he would take them and he would put them in the left margin of a piece of paper. And then he would give the translation in English next to it. Just like when you open up a dictionary, you look up a word, you see the English word, and then you see the definition of it next to it. This is the same kind of thing, except instead of the English word at the beginning, there's an Egyptian character that he got from the papyri. So he takes the Egyptian character and then he gives it a translation in English next to it. And it will also sometimes pronounce it in English, right? And so this is what he is doing. And he's going to try and do an entire dictionary of English to Egyptian to English language. And he's doing it by revelation. So he's doing this whole thing over here. Now, when you get to the Book of Abraham, apologists have come up with all sorts of ways of trying to get around the fact that the Egyptian translation, first off, doesn't match anything that we know of from the same time period that it claims to come from in Egyptian history, but it certainly doesn't match the papyri that was found. So they come up with ideas to get around that. Some of them do, which is, well, this is from a part of the papyri that was destroyed, or it's from a completely different papyri. So that's why it doesn't match the translation to the Egyptian. So they come up with ways around it. The Kirtland, the Egyptian alphabet and grammar, You can't really do that. I know they've tried, but it's so much more difficult because it's so obviously a dictionary kind of thing where you have the character and the translation over and over. And it even says that it's a translation or this is rendered this way. That's why it's so hard to get away from it. So now, oh, by the way, it may go without saying, I said I was going to make this simple, right? Hopefully I'm succeeding so far. But we've got this crazy dictionary that has, maybe it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. It has nothing to do with Egyptian, okay? The Egyptian character, yes, because it comes from a papyri. It's Egyptian. The translation in English is outrageously bad. It has nothing whatsoever to do with Egyptian.
Can I say one?
Yeah.
Can I say one thing about that, which is when you say it has nothing to do with Egyptian, so people can go back and look at this, and we'll look at these documents a little bit later too when we look at my Reddit post kind of writing this up. But Joseph Smith had this understanding of Egyptian that is foundationally wrong. So in the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language, he believed that there were these different degrees of Egyptian, that basically you would have a character and then you can add like another flourish to that same character and it would expand on its meaning. So like if you had some character that meant a man and then they added some other flourish to it. Yeah. So this is a perfect example of, we can't really see the degrees, but I know it's on this same piece of papyrus above that he says like the second degrees. And some languages do have degrees or tones, like Mandarin has tones that can use basically the same word or the same sound, but are said in a different way to emphasize different levels of meaning. Egyptian never had that. That's not a thing that Egyptian had. And Joseph Smith invents these 5 different degrees of meaning in Egyptian that never existed. So it's not just as simple as, I mean, you're absolutely right that it doesn't line up with Egyptian, but I like to emphasize this because it's not just like Joseph Smith got the translation wrong. Joseph Smith had a fundamental misunderstanding of the way the language even worked, the way the language was constructed. And we talked about this actually in our linguistics episode, responding to the Light and Truth letter, because this is part of my argument for why the Book of Mormon cannot possibly be historical, which is that Joseph Smith had a misunderstanding of the way Egyptian worked that we see mirrored in the or by the author of Mormon 8, I think it is, or maybe it's Mormon 9, that talks about the way the information density of Egyptian relative to Hebrew in the Book of Mormon, the reason for the Book of Mormon being written in Reformed Egyptian. All to say, Joseph Smith was completely divorced from the reality of how Egyptian worked, not just the translation, but like big structural issues.
Yes, very good. So this is actually the last frame from that clip we played, and you can see the margin. You can see the Egyptian character along the side in the margin, as I said, and then the translation of the Egyptian character along with sometimes a pronunciation guide. Like there's Zub-Zul, there's Zub-Zul-eh, there's Zul-eh, there's Zub, there's Zub-Zul, and there's Zul.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of Zul going on in Egyptian.
There is no Egyptian, Zub. Only Zul.
Yes, exactly. I thought of the line, but didn't know what to do with it. And you hit it out of the park, Kolby. That was beautiful. There is no Egyptian. There is only Zul. So you see what this is. So you can see why this is so damning for Joseph Smith to be involved in a translation process with the Egyptian alphabet and grammar, where you're caught dead to rights translating crap. And here's the stuff you're translating from. Here's what you're translating it to. It has nothing to do with Egyptian. So at the time, by the way, Egyptian was just barely in its infancy. So people didn't know Egyptian. He couldn't just go to a book and look it up. So he's making this up. And nothing demonstrates it more than the Egyptian alphabet and grammar. I keep looking back down here to make sure I get that right. The Egyptian alphabet and grammar. I'm used to calling it the GAEL, the grammar of the alphabet in Egyptian language. It has different names, but I want it to be consistent, the Egyptian alphabet and grammar. So what the apologists do is, because this is so damning, this evidence, you think the Book of Abraham is damning enough, but they got their ways around it. I mentioned it. They can't use those ways here with the Egyptian alphabet and grammar. So what they have to do is they have to get Joseph Smith out of the room. It's like a crime scene. And they got to give Joseph Smith an alibi. They got to get him out of the crime scene. So they say, oh, well, Joseph Smith wasn't involved in this. He wouldn't do this because, I mean, it's obviously wrong. The guy who did this knows nothing about Egyptian. So it couldn't have been Joseph Smith. It had to be W.W. Phelps and Oliver Cowdery and whoever else was involved.
Parrish.
So, having said all of that, the critic, the Cameron guy, right? He says this is hugely damning evidence for Joseph Smith's calling as a translator, because he doesn't know what he's doing. And what Jacob comes back with is, aha, well, to be honest, that looks pretty damning. Until you realize this isn't Joseph Smith's handwriting. See, this is how apologists and Unibly have tried to get Joseph Smith out of the room and saying, this isn't in his handwriting. It's in the handwriting of the scribes. Well, duh. Of course it's in the handwriting of the scribes, because who's dictating it? Well, Joseph Smith, like he always is, right? He has scribes to take down what he dictates ever since the Book of Mormon, and even before the Book of Mormon with some of his early revelations. But
except,
no, of course.
Except I'll pause you for 1 second and say,
put me on pause.
So the Book of Abraham manuscripts are written by the scribes. We have 2 different versions, or I think at least 2 different versions. I'd have to look exactly at how many different versions we have, but I know we have at least 2, because we have simultaneous transcription being taken from Joseph Smith's dictation by the scribes. Here's the hilarious thing about the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language, and to connect it to this video with Jacob, is when I heard Jacob's video, I just watched it because I read Dan Vogel's Book of Abraham book a few years ago. The Book of Abraham was one I really spent a lot of time studying. And when I say Book of Abraham, I mean Book of Abraham and all the Kirtland Egyptian materials, Joseph Smith's connection to all of it. Because Jacob's right that the connection between the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language and the Book of Abraham is not direct. It's related to the same time period. It's related to the same translation project, but it isn't material that comes right from the Book of Abraham, and it doesn't have direct correspondence to translations of the Book of Abraham. But here's the hilarious thing.
What's that? With a couple of apparent
with a couple of exceptions. That's correct. And as I was watching Jacob's video, I immediately knew he was wrong in his ultimate conclusion, trying to separate Joseph Smith from the GAEL, because I knew from reading Dan Vogel's book and from reviewing the materials on the Joseph Smith Papers website that one of the copies of the GAEL is in Joseph Smith's handwriting, which is actually very rare, because Joseph Smith, like you said, rarely actually wrote anything himself. We don't have as much of that as we have Joseph Smith using a scribe to dictate something. So what I thought had happened is that Jacob had just used another copy of the GAEL, or that Cameron had used another copy of the GAEL, the one that wasn't in Joseph Smith's handwriting. And so in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, that's a pretty disingenuous argument, or a very incompetent argument, if you don't know that there actually is a copy of the GAEL in Joseph Smith's handwriting. And lo and behold, the very copy of the GAEL that's on the screen right now, the one that Jacob presented, is the one in Joseph Smith's handwriting, which Dan Vogel was smart enough to point out immediately. He recognizes these documents that well.
I want to play this again so you can see what's going on. Now that we've got that background and everybody can understand a little bit better why this is such a significant argument, and why it is that Cameron's saying what he is, and why it is that Jacob's saying what he is. But unfortunately, see, apologists try to keep the fact that Joseph Smith's handwriting is found, not prevalently, but is found within the Egyptian alphabet and grammar, within the Kirtland Egyptian documents, right? They want to keep that a secret. But unfortunately, well, Jacob keeps it a secret, but unfortunately, while he's doing it, he's actually showing the document that is in Joseph Smith's handwriting. Is that what you're saying?
And on that entire page, the only markation that's not in Joseph Smith's handwriting, because the scholars at the Joseph Smith Papers are able to identify it to that level of granularity, the only character that's not in Joseph Smith's handwriting, people will see it when you play the documents here again in just a second, is the large uppercase B that's in the top left-hand margin. And that's because they were differentiating, I think, between different documents, probably when these things were kept secret in the church's First Presidency vault or church history vault. I'll point it out when we get there.
Okay, I'm going to play this again.
Perfect.
And it's just 40 seconds long, so here we go.
But here's the catch. Joseph Smith's own notebooks, sometimes called the Egyptian alphabet and grammar, include images of the exact Egyptian characters that correspond directly to the published verses of the Book of Abraham.
Uh-oh.
We can literally see the hieroglyphs on one side and the Egyptian translation on the other, detailing Abraham's story.
Not gonna lie, this seems pretty damning until you realize the document on the screen is not in Joseph Smith's handwriting and literally is not the text from the Book of Abraham. Look closely.
Look closely at Joseph Smith's handwriting. So Wally's saying the only problem is this would be pretty damning if it were in Joseph Smith's handwriting. But guess what, everybody? You can rest easy out there in Mormon land because this is not Joseph Smith's handwriting.
Right. Yeah. And the thing that's so funny about this is because this clip is from Jacob's original video, which he's since taken down. I think the thing that's so funny is a lot like our mutual friend, Austin Fife. I say that in quotes, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Jacob actually linked to the Joseph Smith papers for this very document that says whose handwriting it was in.
Oh, no.
On that page. Yeah.
This is
so
embarrassing.
This is another one of those cases where we've got Mormon apologists not reading their own cited sources.
Oh my God. Well, that's maybe why it is that he's taken this video down by now. But before he took it down, he actually issued a correction. But before we get to the correction, folks, I want to get to the story of how it was that he was brought to make that correction. Once again, he says it's not Joseph Smith's handwriting, so we're in the clear. The problem is it is Joseph Smith's handwriting. So I guess what? It is pretty damning. He says it looks pretty damning. It would be pretty damning if it were Joseph Smith's handwriting, but it's not Joseph Smith's handwriting. So it's not pretty damning. It's not damning after all. What used to be damning is now no longer damning. And this goes to the facetiousness of apologists. And I don't want to label them all with that name. Jacob Hansen, at least, okay? He will make an argument saying that if this were Joseph Smith's handwriting, it's damning against Joseph Smith's prophetic calling, right? But when it turns out it is his handwriting, hey, no problem at all. And I think that's disingenuous. And I think that says a lot about Jacob Hansen's character and frankly, why it is that we can't, or at least I can't trust anything he says. Because at one and the same time, or at least within a week, apparently, he will say that if it's Joseph Smith's handwriting, it's damning. And if it's Joseph Smith's handwriting, it's no problem.
Yeah, and a lot like we talked about when we caught Austin Fife in repeated similar errors where he's not reading his own sources. If someone is going to make a mistake of that severity, I know some people are going to say, oh, you're focusing on some ticky-tacky detail. Deal with his other argument. We've already dealt with that other argument. The reality is you can't separate Joseph Smith from the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language. That's just a reality. He later in his life went to use it with regard to the Kinderhook plates, and there were other times that he referenced it. It's mentioned in his journals working on this project, and so that's why it's a desperate expediency that they have to try and make Joseph playing second fiddle to W.W. Phelps. But I think the other thing I just want to highlight is the egregiousness of an error like this to display on a screen, saying this is not Joseph's handwriting, when your very source that you've got pulled up, if you just looked over a little bit on the Joseph Smith papers, it would tell you exactly what's in Joseph Smith's handwriting. It just helps for me reveal the care, I guess, and the level of concern for actually getting the information correct that goes into the way at least these two apologists have approached, getting the details actually right. And then exactly like you said, Jacob did a subsequent video, which we'll play in just a second, where he omits that error that he made.
He doesn't say what the error was that he made. He takes it out of the video.
Correct. And then his conclusion doesn't change, exactly like I knew would happen. And so I think that's pretty funny. I just think it's very revealing of kind of exactly what we've said about apologists, both together and separately over time, which is it's conclusion first based reasoning, right? They reach the conclusion and then they make the argument however they need to. I think it's also just kind of funny because Jacob's language was so strong, saying like, this is pretty damning until you consider this. And even just the smarmy look closely, like
that's the only thing that makes it better.
I know.
Look closely.
It's really fantastic.
At this writing that I'm telling you is not Joseph Smith's handwriting, but what you're looking at is Joseph Smith's handwriting. But I don't know it yet because I'm Jacob Hansen and I'm making a video.
Yep. And to these apologists' credit, to like Austin and Jacob's credit, the one thing I'll say is the reason they've made these mistakes is because they're relying on the research from other apologists, and they're not recognizing that oftentimes those other apologists that they're relying on, whether it's GAEL or other folks,
or Mulestein or Nibley,
that they're not accurately representing the information. So they turn around and parrot those apologetics they've heard before, and it's what leads them into these mistakes.
Into these box canyons.
Yep.
Where you're up there on the cliffs picking them off. So you had posted about this. Now, you were contacted by Dan Vogel, or did you contact Dan Vogel?
Dan and I were just talking about it in the live chat because it's a topic that Dan and I will talk about from time to time. I mean, Book of Abraham generally, and I had seen that he had commented on Jacob's video, but I don't know the documents as well as Dan did. So the credit goes to Dan for being able to actually point out right off the top of his head, oh, that's the Joseph Smith version of the GAEL, and that Jacob had made that obvious error. I just thought he was being disingenuous by keeping from his audience that there was a version of the GAEL in Joseph Smith's handwriting. But yeah, this is my Reddit post that kind of drew attention to this. And I do think it's kind of funny that since Jacob's called me a rando, that this post alone got 60,000 views, which was more than Jacob's original video.
Oh my gosh, well, that sounds like a lot more. At least like 6 times more.
I think he had like 40,000 views, maybe. I don't remember.
Wow,
I don't really care.
People looking at you step on your dingus.
Yeah, I don't really care, but I know that Jacob cares, and so I think it's funny to do that comparison. So yeah, in this post, I gotta
tell you something here.
Sure.
Once when I was just I'd been a prosecuting attorney for like 3 years, and I'd gone through misdemeanors in district court. Now I'm promoted up to doing felonies in superior court, and I am co-counseling a murder trial. And it's a small county. It was an unusual case, and it was getting a lot of attention. And I am co-counseling with the senior deputy in the office, right? And the senior deputy, we're getting ready for. It's going to be weeks long. It's a very difficult case. Eventually, the guy was convicted, but I'm there with my suit. The much older and experienced senior deputy is there with his suit, and he's giving the opening statement. And he gives his whole opening statement, and the other side, they give their opening statement, blah, blah, blah. We get done with the first day of trial, and we go back to the office. And it's at that point that he notices that even though he's wearing a suit and the patterns are similar, it doesn't match. The jacket does not match his pants. Okay. And it's obvious how in a dark house in the morning with maybe only a light bulb, 160 watt, you might think that they look the same because the pattern's similar. But he notices this and he says, oh my gosh, I can't believe I had this on all day. Like my first impression in front of the jury, right? And I said, yeah. I said, I noticed that this morning. And he says, well, why didn't you tell me? And I said, I thought you meant to do that. I had no idea. I just figured this is your fashion sense. Anyway, so why was I saying that story? Hopefully you can get it because I can't remember why now.
Yeah, because it was such a choice. It was to you, it was such an obvious error, fashion error, I guess, that you assumed it was a legitimate choice, right?
Yes.
Is that where you're going?
Yes. Thank you very much. So can you read this? I've got it taking up the entire page where our faces are not on it. Are you able to read that from here? This is your post that you put up on Reddit about this subject.
Yep, about 9 days ago. So yeah, it was Jacob's video was just last week. So it says, first, I want to give a huge shout out to Dan Vogel for commenting on Jacob's video and telling me to go check out his response. I doubt I'd have caught this without him pointing it out. So we'll also talk about, I'll just pause here for a second and say, we'll also talk about at the end of this, how I think Jacob not giving Dan recognition for this, because when I messaged Jacob and brought this error to his attention, because I honestly did that to try and be nice and say, hey, your error here is really embarrassing according to your own cited source. So you might want to go fix that. So I reached out to him rather than just, dunk on him in a Reddit post like this. I wanted to give him a chance to actually fix it and see what he'd do. And I told him.
That's nice.
Yeah. And I told him that Dan did it and just said, hey, I just want to note Dan's the one who brought this to your attention in his comments first. I think I said, so it might be nice if you give him a shout out or something. And Jacob doesn't do that. And so I just want to highlight the reason I'm giving Dan credit is because I'm not a hack. Like, you give people credit for their ideas when they bring something to your attention. But
so you gave him a chance to do the right thing, to make it up, to point out the error that he had made, to give Dan credit. He did not do that, which we will get to, but he did not do that. And it's because of that you posted this on Reddit and we're doing the show now.
I posted this on Reddit at the same time I sent the thing to Jacob, alerting him to his thing, because I'm not only going to dunk
You
on
did
him.
want to publicly dunk on him.
Of course, I wanted to publicly
Okay, I'm
dunk
just trying
on
to
him.
make it clear.
I'm not hiding that.
Just asking questions.
But at the same time, I wanted to give him a chance to fix it on his own. So,
okay. So you're about one sentence into this. So how far are
that's
you?
as far as I made it. Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna put it back up full screen.
Okay, I said, I just have to share how hilarious this recent mistake by my personal favorite clout shark, Jacob Hansen, is. He made this mistake during a response video he recently made on issues relating to the Book of Abraham. Jacob is responding to a video about the Book of Abraham from a Christian apologist that is going after the link between the Book of Abraham and the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language, which we just watched. So the audience is aware of that. Jacob's video is largely about separating Joseph from the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language because the contents are absurdly embarrassing by rehashing the reverse translation hypothesis. In essence, Jacob is arguing that W.W. Phelps, not Joseph, is responsible for the GAEL, which is kind of the shortened name for the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language.
Yes.
This becomes necessary because the GAEL is patently ridiculous, and we've already rehearsed that, I think.
Zip, zip, zool.
Zip zub zool. After displaying some of the portions of one version of the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language on the screen, with the Christian apologist attacks on the Book of Abraham playing, Jacob says this: "Not going to lie, this seems pretty damning until you realize the document on the screen is not in Joseph Smith's handwriting, and literally is not from the text of the Book of Abraham. Look closely." And then in parenthetical, I indicate, "And I promise this is said with the very most irritating and condescending tone."
Look closely.
Is that accurate?
The spirits are about to speak.
I think that's accurate. He said it pretty snidely. And I said, and here's the very best part. Jacob is literally displaying Joseph Smith's handwriting at that very moment while being completely unaware of it. Let me demonstrate. Here's the page of the GAEL, among others, that Jacob shows. Note the distinctive capital B at the top left. So I drew attention to this when we were playing the actual video version, but you can see it there.
Oh, so way over there on the margin next to
correct.
the tear. Okay.
Yep. So you can see this is Jacob's original video here. Book of Abraham debunked what the evidence said. So this is a still shot from his video. If you'll go down a little bit, and I say, just for good measure, here's another page he displays from the same version of the GAEL. This is actually the page on the back of that first page. And it said, note the not Joseph Smith's handwriting there.
He even labeled it. He even labeled it as not Joseph. And you're telling me that what he labeled as not Joseph's handwriting is Joseph's handwriting?
It's literally all Joseph's handwriting. Yes.
Okay.
And so then if you scroll down a little bit further, it says, and here's the same exact page from the Joseph Smith papers, which Jacob cited as his source, but clearly didn't read. Now, it's kind of small in the way it's delineated there, but you can see I've got my mouse hovering over the note, which says Joseph Smith's handwriting begins, which is right at the top.
Here. Yes, it's capital J, capital S, handwriting begins.
Yep. You also would have seen this if you looked at the source note. So I'll go back to reading from my post. I said, note the note there. The entire page, with the exception of that capital B, which is why I've drawn attention to it, is in Joseph Smith's handwriting. This is additionally made clear by just looking at the landing page for the different versions of the document, as well as the source note, which relevantly provides, quote, English in the handwriting of J.S., Oliver Cowdery, and W.W. Phelps. So when the the Joseph Smith papers staff,
maybe
when
they know
are
what JS stood for. Is that possible?
Must have been. Yeah.
They didn't spell it out. They didn't spell it out like Oliver Cowdery and William W. Phelps.
Well, if he were a true apologist, the fact that it says JS, they would just argue, how do we really know that JS meant Joseph Smith? It could have been any person with the initials JS. That's how.
Yes. If this document, this footnote in the Joseph Smith Papers Project were 200 years old, they would be making exactly that.
Exactly. So I continue and say, seriously, you can't make that up, especially because there are hundreds of believing Mormons in the comments talking so confidently, like they have any idea what Jacob is so confidently being incorrect about. And when I say hundreds, I mean, there were literally 700 comments on the first video. And that was really the only reason I thought it was funny to make a post like this, is just to highlight, like we've done repeatedly with the Light and Truth letter, how broken the epistemology is when you're so dedicated to your conclusion, regardless of what the evidence says. There were hundreds of people applauding Jacob, talking about how much clarity he's bringing to this issue when he's just 100% completely wrong about a huge portion of his argument.
Let me look at this. This is the thoughtful. Yeah, I got to check this out and just see where it is now as far as the views on it. Oh, I can't check it out because
he deleted it. Exactly. He deleted it.
Well, I guess we'll have to take your word for that. It was an extremely popular post, and he managed to embarrass himself in front of a large audience.
And they didn't know it.
They will now. That's the whole point of this. We want to
right.
get the word out. He deletes it. We preserve it.
Oh, and I can see in the next sentence, I make the same point I just did. So I guess my thought trains always run along the same tracks. It says, I don't say that to be mean. I say that to observe that the epistemology in the larger community doesn't work properly because it's not about sorting out fact from fiction, but about reaching the predetermined conclusion. What Jacob is saying is faith affirming, so it doesn't matter if it is 100% wrong, according to the Joseph Smith papers that Jacob cited.
Now, the rest hang on just a second here, okay?
Yeah, of course.
If Jacob were an honest person, and if he were telling the truth, that this might seem pretty damning, this accusation that Joseph Smith's handwriting is in the Egyptian alphabet and grammar. If he were being honest about that, and then finding out it is Joseph Smith's handwriting, he should be having a faith crisis. He should be dealing with it. He should be trying to grapple with this fact that he's identified this as damning, which it is, and we've explained why. And it would be if it were Joseph Smith's handwriting, and it is Joseph Smith's handwriting. So he should be doing some deep introspection at this point, I would think.
That's what I expected as well.
And
that's exactly why I think I was surprised that he put out a subsequent video, which we'll play a clip from here in just a second, where he did that within like a day or two of me bringing the error to his attention. Now, I can absolutely understand wanting to remove inaccurate information within a day or two, but to then churn out a video that comes to the exact same conclusion, I think what it really just shows, and this was part of the message that I sent to Jacob, is, hey, you should probably read Dan Vogel's book on this topic because he really deals with the evidence, and his book really breaks down the different papyri that were involved, the different quotes from church history that deal with like the missing scroll theory, because that was also part of Jacob's video. The bottom line is Jacob's video had tons of errors in it. And in fact, on the subsequent video that he's now since deleted, Dan also brought a bunch of additional errors that he made to his attention. And so exactly like you're saying, I would have expected, like if I had made an error of that significant
magnitude,
I definitely wouldn't be rushing out to come to the exact same conclusion without really doing my due diligence and figuring out how did I get here? How did I miss reading my source note?
I know. And can I just say this? As an attorney, or just as anybody who's arguing any kind of proposition, okay, before you go public and say it would be really damning evidence if, you better make sure that that damning evidence is not damning. Okay. In other words, you should really, really spend some time doing your background research to make absolutely certain that you're correct. I have no idea why it was that he was so incorrect, but boy, was he. And it exploded in his face.
And can I, since people appreciate us talking together and sometimes swapping our legal war stories, what you just said reminds me of this kind of unspoken or unwritten rule of cross-examination. So when you're questioning a witness and it's not your witness, you're doing what's called cross-examination. And the point of cross-examination is, even though you have to ask a question, you are asking usually yes or no questions that are really an argument to the jury phrased along the lines of a question, right?
A leading question.
Yeah, you can ask leading questions on cross-examination.
In fact, you usually should.
Almost always you should. Back when I was a criminal prosecutor, I tried a case that involved a car accident that was caused by, the other side's argument was that it was caused by a sneeze. Okay, but this sneeze led to this individual running someone over that was a pedestrian and almost killing them. So it sounds silly that the whole case turned upon how a sneeze happened, but it really did have significant implications for that person's insurance claim and all other sorts of things. And as I was cross-examining that defendant who actually took the stand, which is also rare and usually advised against, I broke that unwritten rule of cross-examination, which is don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. This is the same reason that you're highlighting, not saying stuff like that unless you're absolutely certain, is because you don't want to give the other side ammunition to then use against you. You don't have control over it, right? And so while this defendant was on the stand, and he was basically telling his story that, well, the reason I ran her over isn't because I wasn't paying attention or because I was looking at my phone. It was because I sneezed, and I don't have any control over a sneeze. How are you going to hold me accountable? I asked the individual, and I didn't know the answer to this question, so that's why it was violating that rule. Can you demonstrate for the jury how you sneezed? And I kid you not, the kid took his shirt, put it clear up over his head, and then sneezed into his shirt, which worked out for me, but probably shouldn't have, because
I don't think that's a reasonable way to sneeze while you're driving.
Kudos for honesty, but I was shocked.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I got another story, but I'm not going to tell it. Okay. The main thing is this: is if you're going to make a statement like it'd be really damning evidence against my side if this were true, you better make sure it's not true.
Right.
Okay. So did we get done with that? Did we get to the end of that piece that you'd written and posted over there?
I think we were close. So I said the rest of Jacob's arguments are not worth responding to. He just plays about a 10-minute clip of Dan Peterson finding ancient parallels, most of which, when actually looked into, are not really hits without engaging in significant squinting. Jacob's entire attempt to separate the GAEL from the translation is borrowed from Guy and Nibley, and Dan Vogel shows definitively why those arguments don't work in his amazing book on the subject. These types of errors from apologists, in the midst of them being so very confident, will never cease being funny to me. We all make mistakes and we're all wrong sometimes, but coming from such a smarmy character, this was pretty funny. Look closely, Jacob. Guess we'll just have to go with the pretty damning conclusion you landed at before being confidently incorrect. And then when Jacob took his video down, I added this edit to add. I told Jacob about his error, and he confirmed it and said he would be issuing a correction. He gets credit for that, and somehow I know he'll just find a different way to reach the same ultimate conclusion. So I guess I actually did that right after I messaged Jacob, and turns out I was right. He did find a way to, even though he said it was pretty damning if that were true, to reach the exact same conclusion, that it's not a big deal.
I got to tell you, when you do something that bad, it's usually best just to take the whole thing down and be quiet for a while, lay low, and hope it blows over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But honestly, the whole thing is that he's just arguing. All he's doing is arguing his position, which he's already concluded is correct. Right. He really doesn't think there's any damning evidence. He'll say it's damning in the hypothetical. When he finds out it really is Joseph's handwriting, it's not damning at all. And he just goes on blithely arguing for the LDS Church.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Now we actually have, because of Kolch, right? Kolch did a short or a TikTok about this issue. And as part of that, he captured the epilogue that Jacob Hansen put on his redone video. He took out the offending piece out of his video, the one where he said it would be pretty damning. To be honest, it would be pretty damning. He takes that part out, and then he leaves it up. It's still very, very positive. It's still, arguing for the book of Abraham, but we take out the piece of damning evidence when he finds out that it's damning. Okay. He reaches the same conclusion, and then he gives this little voiceover on the epilogue. And this is his correction, or whatever it is that he might be calling it. Let me see if I can find this. I'm going to take this off the screen. Great piece, by the way. And you said about 60,000 people have seen that?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And how many comments?
I think were there like 100, I think I saw from that last little screen.
There were absolutely a ton of them. It was amazing.
While you're changing screens, I want to say one thing, which is I drew attention to how many people looked at it. And since you just mentioned it, one of the reasons I think that that's funny to me and why I note that is because of Jacob's whole rando comment to me. But the second reason is because oftentimes when we push back against individuals like Jacob Hansen, people tell us, what are you doing? You're just giving oxygen to somebody who otherwise shouldn't be given oxygen to, right? And I think what I'm trying to defend myself and point out is if more people saw my takedown of Jacob's video than saw Jacob's video, we're not actually giving Jacob oxygen. We're actually pointing out the flaws in his arguments more than bringing his arguments to bringing people to his arguments in favor of his arguments.
There's the old expression, and Jacob has adopted it as his own mantra, that any publicity is good publicity, even bad publicity is good publicity. But I don't think publicity is good like this, where it demonstrates that you called something damning evidence against Joseph Smith. If it were true, you found out it was true, and then it's not damning evidence anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just can't trust somebody like that. How can you trust somebody like that about the church? If it's damning here, but it's not damning now, I mean, you know that this person is going to say whatever it is this person thinks they have to say in order to persuade you that Mormonism is true. Mm-hmm. That's why I came up with this old saying a few weeks ago, which is never trust somebody who's trying to convert you. They will never be honest with you. Their goal isn't to be honest. Their goal is to convert you, which means they can't be honest. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I think I've got this video now. I'm going to add it to the stage. This is going to loop, I think, twice, right?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
So let's watch it both times, but you've seen a lot of it already going into it. This is our good friend Kolch, who made this video with his exceptional talents, and we'll see the first part, but we're also going to see the epilogue and hear Jacob's voice as to what it is that he did for his correction, which I'll put in air quotes. Okay, here we go.
Joseph Smith's own notebooks, sometimes called the Egyptian alphabet and grammar, include images of the exact Egyptian characters that correspond directly to the published verses of the Book of Abraham. We can literally see the hieroglyphs on one side and the Egyptian translation on the other, detailing Abraham's story.
Not gonna lie, this seems pretty damning until you realize the document on the screen is not in Joseph Smith's handwriting. Look closely. Hey guys, I made a mistake in the previous version of this video. Anyway, I just want to be sure that I'm transparent with anyone who saw the previous version of this video and correct the record. I hope you'll accept my apology for that error.
He honestly never said what the error was. He never said
Joseph
what the
Smith's
error was.
own
Here's the
notebooks,
replay,
sometimes called the Egyptian alphabet and
my
grammar,
God.
include images of the exact Egyptian characters that correspond directly to the published verses of the Book of Abraham. We can literally see the hieroglyphs on one side and the Egyptian translation on the other, detailing Abraham's story.
Not gonna lie, this seems pretty damning until you realize the document on the screen is not in Joseph Smith's handwriting. Look closely. Hey guys, I made a mistake in the previous version of this video. Anyway, I just want to be sure that I'm transparent with anyone who saw the previous version of this video and correct the record. I hope you'll accept my apology for that error.
I think you need to issue an apology for your apology. Oh my gosh. Oh,
well,
my God.
The other thing I think is so funny about that is that Jacob says, hey guys, I just want to be really transparent. I can think of no correction that would be less transparent than not telling people what the mistake was, how serious it was, how it demonstrates you don't read your own sources, or where it came from. Dan Vogel is a legitimate Mormon historian who has been in this arena for a long time, and he absolutely deserved credit for pointing that out to Jacob in the comments, which he did do. And when I messaged Jacob directly, I told him that Dan brought it to his attention. So I just think it's funny because there will be people who nitpick this and say, why are you being so harsh on him? Because you can't get up there and say, I care about transparency to your audience when it's so obvious that you don't care about transparency. Like, wouldn't those be the baseline?
Sounds like somebody I've heard of. It sounds like the Mormon Church. It sounds like Elder Ballard. We're as transparent as we know how to be. Honestly, I can't believe this because I had thought when I had heard that he had done a new video, he had taken out the part that was wrong, and I had heard he put it at the end, right? And first off, everybody's going, he put it at the end. In other words, the correction, which is not a correction. because nobody's going to watch it at that point, and that's the
Right.
whole point of putting it. He's burying the correction and I don't know, A17, right? The page in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody will see it. And that was one thing, and that was understandable. Of course, he's going to do that. It's not the right way to do it, right? But it's understandable he would do it that way. But then to find out that not only did he put it at the end, but he didn't even say what the error was. He just took it out and then said, I made a big mistake, and now it's not there anymore, so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, he did do something separate talking about how he made the error, but I'm betting that he took that down, because I don't remember exactly how he worded it in that like separate little short that he did, saying like, hey, I'm gonna re-upload this video with some corrections. But I don't remember him drawing attention to what the actual error was. And yeah,
That's
I'm not
unfortunate he took
seeing-
it down. Otherwise, we could find out.
Oh, he actually does have it. Do you want me to
He has
share
what?
it?
Who has what?
He has his other
Jacob
correction.
does?
Yeah, he does still have that video up.
Well, wait a second here. So there's a separate video for his
It's on his
correction?
shorts. Yeah.
Well, let me see here if I can find it. Okay, so a quick correction.
Yes, that's it.
Okay. So I think I just found it over at YouTube at his Thoughtful Faith, aka Thoughtful Taint website. And let me see if I can put it up here. So it looks like in addition to the little voiceover on the epilogue of the actual episode itself, which is gone now, he had also put up a short, and the short is still up. So how strange that you've got a video with a major league error in it, and you put up a correction over on a short.
Yeah.
Even
Coach
after you've already edited the actual video itself.
Coach was really bothered by that too, because he thinks that's
you're burying. I mean, it's not even
Exactly.
in the same newspaper now
exactly.
where you have your correction. All right, so let me see if I can share the screen here. He has a quick correction. Let me find him, put him up on the screen. This is about 11 seconds long, and I don't know how long this will be up here, but we'll see. Okay, so let's hear what he has to say.
Hey guys, due to a factual error in my Book of Abraham video, I've released a new version of that video that corrects the mistake and explains the details. Anyway, be sure to check it out when you have time, as I want to correct the record and be sure that I'm not spreading misinformation.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What details? Didn't he say it? The correction has the details in it?
That's what he said.
So once again, he makes a separate short, which once again says I made a mistake, but doesn't say what the mistake is. He says I go into the details of the mistake on the video, which I've corrected, but he doesn't do that either.
Yeah, and I wish I'd pulled the entirety of the epilogue, because I don't remember if Colch cut it or if there was any more detail. I really don't. So and we can't access it at this point because Jacob's taken it down. So
I'm going to ask you about that in a second. I want to replay this once again.
Sure.
Let's see what it is he says over here on his short. It's got 792 likes. There's a lot of people who like this short. I don't know if that many people like it after they find out that once again he's not telling the truth about the detailed explanation.
Hey guys, due to a factual error in my Book of Abraham video, I've released a new version of that video that corrects the mistake and explains the details. Anyway, be sure to check it out when you have time, as I want to correct the record and be sure that I'm not spreading misinformation. Hey guys, due to...
Oh my gosh. Wow. There's no details in there. No details at all. So
yeah,
and you see in the background, the lavender light, it is a cry for help.
and I think it's funny again that, Jacob doesn't want to tell his audience especially, and who brought the misinformation I had spread to my attention was two ex-Mormon critics of the church who know this stuff better than me. That's the other thing he doesn't want to tell his audience.
Absolutely amazing. Okay, I think we've laid this out, this story, and I think it's important that this be documented for posterity, because we know that Jacob Hansen isn't going to leave these things up forever. And so we've got to record them here and allow people to see what actually happened in real time. I want to just give you a chance to say something. Then I want to go to a couple of slides I made, because This is not the first time this sort of thing has happened in Mormon.
Well, it's exactly like the Nahum mistake we caught Austin Fife in as well, along with other mistakes. But the one last thing I wanted to say about this is I know, especially, I did an interview earlier this week with Steve Pinecker about our response to Austin Fife, and I'm linking these two because it never is fun to feel like you're picking on someone for making errors. We all make errors. I've made them. I've had to make corrections in
This is my chief joy in life. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I'll speak for myself then. Counsel, you can have your own opinion. This is one area where we diverge, I guess. But all I'm saying is sometimes I get this pushback like, oh, how hard are you looking at this stuff to bring these errors to the surface? And I just want to say, not hard at all. I literally just watch these guys' content sometimes when it pops up, and almost every time I do, there's something that we could talk about that's misleading or that's ignoring significant material that they should be talking about if they're really trying to give people an accurate picture of whatever factual scenario they're talking about. So I just wanted to address that because there were some questions that Steve had me address on my interview with him about the Light and Truth letter where people were asking the same question. And I just want to say that, I have a job, I have a life and a family outside of doing this stuff. It's just when it pops up and I notice it, I point it out. And it's not like I'm trolling through all of these guys' content to find these errors. They're just immediately apparent. So
I know. And these are the apologists. These are the apologists for the LDS Church. I think between you and me, Kolby, that we need a better brand of apologists.
We definitely do. Are you saying we need better enemies, as Jacob said about?
I was riffing off of what he said.
Yeah.
We need better enemies. Well, we need better apologists. And here's the other thing, to put it in historical context, so Jacob doesn't have to feel too bad, although he should feel worse than he does, is this. The most damning evidence against Joseph Smith, all right? So this has happened before. It happened with Hugh Nibley, and it happened regarding the 1826 Bainbridge, New York trial, where Joseph Smith was tried for glass-looking / being a disorderly person. And this is something that is now so well established that it's come to be understood as being true because the documents were found by a researcher named Wesley Walters. It caused a great deal of controversy, this whole issue about whether Joseph Smith actually was put on trial for this, whether he was convicted of it. Once again, I don't care if he was convicted of it. The testimony alone is the most notable thing. We've talked about that before, especially from Josiah Stoll, who was testifying on behalf of Joseph Smith and burying him while he was doing it. So it caused a great deal of controversy, leading to Hugh Nibley writing the following in his book, The Myth Makers, which was published in 1961. So here's what he says. If this court record is authentic, okay, 1961, this is the court record that was found by Wesley Walters about the 1826 glass-looking trial in Bainbridge, New York. 10 years later, this would be demonstrated to be authentic, okay? But this is 1961 and 1971. It will be demonstrated to be authentic, even to Fair Mormon. Even Fair Mormon has to admit it, all right? So it's really, really authentic if Fair Mormon has to admit it. Here's what Hugh Nibley wrote. If this court record is authentic, it is the most damning evidence in existence against Joseph Smith. And then he goes on and talks about a few other things, okay? But that's the main quote. 1961 was the date. Now, this is from the FAIR website. I got this yesterday from their website. He says it was easy to cast doubt on the reality of the 1826 hearing until the bills from Judge Albert Neely and Constable Philip DeZang were found in 1971. And then it goes on and it talks about how all the problems with this, because Wesley Walters took the documents out of the library and forever putting in doubt whether they were actually authentic. The problem with this action is once you have removed a document from a historical setting and then try to restore it to the same setting, you can't prove that you have not altered the document. These were all the arguments that were going on against Wesley Walters, that he had altered the document. The actions of Walters and Pofari compromised the documents, damn it. By having the documents removed and only returned under threat of a lawsuit by the county, it opened the possibility that they could be forged documents. Oh, by the way, they are generally considered to be authentic. Fair Mormon website. So after putting in all the protestations that we heard about for years until they were authenticated, they have to admit at the end, they are generally considered to be authentic. So why did you put in all those objections to them? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like wanting to have it both ways. It's exactly like the write-ups we saw in the Light and Truth letter over and over again, where it will offer evidence as if it's trying to convince you, and then right at the end say, but by the way, I'm disclaiming any liability for making a claim here. It just really gets me thinking.
Yes. So the bottom line is that Jacob Hansen doesn't have to feel too bad because Hugh Nibley made the same mistake. In 1961, he published, if this court record, 1826 trial, is authentic, it is the most damning evidence in existence against Joseph Smith. 10 years later, more documents are found, the bills from the judge and from the constable relating to the same trial. It's considered to be authentic. Joseph Smith was tried for being a glass looker and a disorderly person in Bainbridge, New York in 1826, arising out of his digging probably for that silver mine, that Spanish silver mine for Josiah Stowell.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what happens to this whole thing? Did Hugh Nibley leave the church? Did Hugh Nibley go through a faith crisis? I can't answer the second one. I can answer the first one. No, he didn't leave the church. So what he called the most damning evidence, if it were true, when it's made to be true, now it's not damning at all. And it goes on, and now it's just sort of part of what God was putting Joseph Smith through in order to prepare him to become a prophet.
Yeah, and if I can offer kind of an analogous example, but in reverse, when Mark Hoffman was forging letters and documents relating to church history, one of the ones that he forged that people will be familiar with is what's known as the White Salamander letter, that basically equated the original appearance of Moroni, or one of the appearances of Moroni, right, with a white salamander. And it was building from, and that was fake. It was a fake letter that Hoffman was building because there were these weird accounts about the treasure guardian and it turning into a creature like a toad sitting in the box. So that was one of the geniuses, not to give him credit, but one of the geniuses of Mark Hoffman in his church history forgeries is he was hooking into issues that people already were aware of, and he was basically exploiting evidence that people thought may have existed or that seemed reasonable to fit with other accounts. And in response to that, Dallin Oaks, a member of the First Presidency, actually gave a talk that fully was ready to incorporate the White Salamander letter, which later was proven to be a forgery and false, into the faithful narrative. And my point with this is, look at how it can work either way when you just really care about supporting that conclusion. You can be prepared to get the entire church membership to accept this completely false and fraudulent account and make it no problem for church history. So it works both ways, right?
Very good point. Very good point. And we actually talked about this last night on Mormonism After Dark. It came up, and I had said, at that point, I realized that there is, actually, I didn't realize it at that point. It still took me some time. But I finally realized that if an apostle or anybody, an apologist, because he's functioning as an apologist at the time, if an apologist can try and argue that Joseph Smith calling Moroni a salamander, and not just calling him a salamander, I mean, he's in a hole and he transforms himself into a man, okay, who then clocks Joseph Smith and sends him reeling. If an apologist can argue that that's okay, then an apologist will argue anything.
Mm-hmm. I am firmly
that an apologist will not argue is faith promoting or not faith destroying.
Exactly. I'm firmly convinced, and I've joked about this before, but I really do believe this. We could find a letter from Joseph Smith in Joseph Smith's handwriting, also sworn to by Emma and Oliver Cowdery, that says, I made it all up, and the apologist would find some way to spin that in a way, not that just isn't faith destroying, but if you think about it real hard, is actually faith affirming. It's quite incredible.
It is an amazing thing. And the last thing I'd wanted to say about Jacob, and I'll give you the final word here in a second before we exit out of this, because we just want to talk about Jacob today. We wanted to commemorate this event in his life story, since he's busy trying to rub it out of the internet and flush it down the memory hole. But here's the thing. The apologist point of view, as Jacob has now taught us, is this, that the issue isn't whether the thing itself, okay, and here the thing is Joseph Smith's handwriting on the Kirtland or the Egyptian alphabet and grammar. The issue isn't whether the thing is damning in itself. The issue for the apologist, right? The issue is whether it should have been called damning in the first place. Because that's what Jacob is doing. By the way, Jacob, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Jacob has been rueing the fact that he called this damning evidence and that he presented this evidence. It's Joseph Smith's handwriting. And he says, wouldn't it be damning if this were Joseph Smith's handwriting? And so, yes, it would be. What he is rueing is not the fact that it's actually Joseph Smith's handwriting. What he's rueing is not the fact that this is damning evidence against Joseph Smith's prophetic ability to translate English or Egyptian into English, which flows right over into the book of Abraham itself, which also flows over into the book of Mormon, okay? But especially into the book of Abraham. That's not the issue for him. The issue is for him that he shouldn't have phrased it that way. He should not have said, I should not have said that, right? It's Hagrid again. I should not have said that. I shouldn't have said it was damning evidence. That's the only issue, because he's not being honest. If it were pretty damning, then he would be responding in a way that would reflect that, okay? He's not. He's responding in a way that a guy who's trying to argue his case and win at any price, including being dishonest to the jury and not being true to the facts. So that's all I have to say. Kolby, I'm going to give you the closing word here, but first I'm going to say, everybody, thanks for joining us. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. Thanks to everybody who donates to Radio Free Mormon. If you haven't yet, go over to radiofreemormon.org. Please click the donate button, make a continuing donation today. $5 a month if you can do that. $10 would be great, but $5 is all I'm asking for. Thank you so much. And if you can't, please tell a friend or two about the show and see if we can grow our subscribers. Now, Kolby, the final word I leave to you because this is your story.
Yeah. You know, when we point out stuff like this about the way apologetics works, it's just interesting as we've been doing this project about the Light and Truth letter and then doing some responses to some of these other apologists, the responses you get. I think the one thing I'll just say to kind of wrap up is I'm not bringing this, when you ask me about doing a show about this, I'm not bringing, or when I wrote it up on Reddit, whatever, I'm not bringing this to attention because I want to make Jacob look bad, although that is a delicious part of it, if I'm completely honest, right? When someone's so smarmy and has been such a, I'll just say such a difficult to see as a good faith actor in this space, it is kind of
bring
nice.
You over to the dark side.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to see someone hoisted on by their own petard. But really what it's about is it's about ideas. And what I mean by that is I want to talk about this because I want to reveal the epistemology that's at work behind what these apologists are doing. It is conclusion-based reasoning, and that's so clearly demonstrated by the fact that whether it's Austin Fife, as we pointed out with repeated issues, or whether it's Jacob Hansen with this one, and we've pointed out other ones where Jacob's done the same thing too, the facts can change and their conclusion doesn't change. What does that tell you? That's the point of why we wanted to talk about this. It's not to be mean to Jacob. That's a sweet bonus, but it's because if people really care about believing what's true, which I think they should, if they should really care about the facts, then I want them to see the way these individuals navigate the facts. They don't care about the facts. They'll reach the conclusion even if the facts, which they call pretty damning, change. And I think that speaks volumes about the way they operate in this space. And that's what we wanted to talk about today. And I think we've made the point.
Yes, Jacob Hansen will continue to believe in a proposition even after he has discovered damning evidence against it. Good point. Well, thank you so much, Kolby. Thank you, everybody. I've already done the pitch for the donations and the clicks and the subscribes and the likes and all those good things. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, this is Radio Free Mormon, signing off the air.